Welcome CSC 235 to exercise 13, unit 13, and we're going to call this database connect because we're going to connect to our database that we already created. And we're using PythonAnywhere because it's a little easier and we have a little more control because we can create our database right in here and connect to it in here instead of going to MongoDB and trying to connect to the cloud and getting all those settings and trying to work with that in Replit, which was a little bit of a problem. So I think this will be easier. It's just something a little bit different than a MongoDB. We're using tables. I think it's a little bit easier. But I just want to show you something. In W3 Schools, we'll use some of W3 Schools to help us a little bit. And if you go to Python, because remember, Flask is part of Python, Django, DJANGO is part of Python. We're going to use Flask through Python because that'll work in PythonAnywhere. But if you go to Python in W3 Schools and go down, you could see that you'll have Python MySQL and Python MongoDB. It works with both. And because we can work with MySQL in PythonAnywhere, we're going to use this right now. I just think it'll be easier because we'll have more control over our database right inside our IDE than connecting to something with another account, with another website, with other settings. We have everything right in here. And I just want to show you that we'll get started, we'll connect, and I'll just show you what it does here. It gets started. It talks about installing a connector, a driver, MySQL driver, called my-sql-connector Python. Now we've used that in the Python course in Programming 1, CSC 121. We used that just for a little bit just to connect to a database. So we did the same thing. So we'll do a little bit of that here just to get started. But then what we'll do is we'll try to connect on the front end because this is just connecting on the back end. What we did in Programming 1 was just back end. We didn't have a website, an actual page to look at. We just kind of ran things in the console. So we're going to take this, start with this, and then work a little bit further. But they have steps in here to create a database. You can create a database through Python, and it's just SQL code. That's all you're doing. It's just embedded into Python functions and scripts. So that's what we're going to do first. But we don't have to do that because we already created our database in PHP-myAdmin, and I even showed you how to do it in PythonAnywhere. So they show you how to create a database, and that's what we did in PHP-myAdmin, how to create a table, and they have all the code here. And this is just SQL code. This stuff in red in quotes is just SQL code. Insert, select. Now I'm going to go to select because this is what we're eventually going to do. We want to select and we want to display everything. Now this will display it in a console first, and that's what we did in Programming 1. We use code like this, and what we have to do first is install our driver. This is a driver for Python that connects to a MySQL database. And sometimes it's already installed, but you could follow the steps here to do that. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to keep this open. This is W3 Schools, and it's Python, and then I went down to Python MySQL, and we're going to work with this. So I'm going to keep this open. I'm going to go back to my dashboard, and I just want to make sure I don't have any consoles open. If there are consoles open and there's none, you can just close them, and we won't have any consoles open right now. Now, I just want to point out here that we have a Bash console, we have MySQL console, we have Python consoles. We can get to our MySQL console by going right to the database. We don't have to do that. But we can sometimes install things right in Bash if we have to install like a my-sql connector. We could do that right in Bash. So we could do that first. But before we get there, we just want to look at a couple things first and make sure you're at the same place. Now, files, I have a folder. I called it CSC 235, and I asked you to do that too. Even though in the one video, it has databases or whatever. But I wanted you to do this for this class. So when you go in here, here's your username, here's your directory. There's an output text, and I think I did a demo of just whatever console output. I put it in a text file. Now, it's okay to be in here. You could have other files in here. It's not going to mess with anything. This is the SQL file, and I just want to point out, too, this SQL file from PHP-myAdmin. Remember, we exported this from PHP-myAdmin. Now, you could create this from scratch, but it was a lot easier to do it there. And what this will do is just show the file. I'm not in any kind of console now. I'm just looking at the file. It's a text file. So this was generated by PHP-myAdmin. Here it says PHP-myAdmin, SQL dump. It even has the date I did it, all that. It has create table characters. And so if you ever deleted it and you needed to use this code again, it has to have a table. It will create a table called characters. So that's why sometimes we'll create a database first and make sure we have. So it will create a table characters in there. So if you make a basic database, and it says database this name. Now, I'm not sure if you could create a new database with a different name, if this will matter. If you give it a different name, if it'll still put characters in there. I think it would still do that, because no other place do I see SQL code that it has to have that database name. And the reason I mention that, because as long as you have this code, I could send you this code. Let's say you had a problem in PHP my-admin, and you had a problem exporting it, or it was too crowded and you got bumped out. Any kind of problem you could have had on an open kind of website like that. I could send you this code, this SQL code, and you can use my database. I could put it on my warrant. It's just a text file. I could put it in a text file, and you could pretty much use it and then just change it to be an SQL file. Create a new SQL file and put everything in. But this is the code that creates the table in the database. So this populates it right now. So I don't just send you a database. This is the code that does it. So what I'm saying is, if you ever had a problem, you could just create a new database and put this stuff into it if you had any problem from PHP my-admin. You could, drop a database. You could make a new database. I could do this. Let me just show you this quick, even though you don't have to do this. But if I went to databases here, and let's say you had a problem and you needed to make a new one. So I'm just going to go here and make a new database, and I'm just going to call it SpongeBob, and I'll just call it sample for now. I'll call it sample DB for now, and I'll create it. Okay, there it is. Now, if I go into here, now when I say go into here, I mean I'm going to go into the MySQL interpreter. So it's going to open a console when I go into here. So I created an empty database right now. So I'm going to go into here. And you can see it's loading the MySQL interpreter for this database. Now, it doesn't tell you there's nothing in here, but if I go into show tables, I think it's tables plural, empty set, it would be an error. If I put table and it wasn't the right code, it would say an error. But it says empty set, meaning there's no tables in there. So that's okay. So how do I put tables in there? Well, what I can do is do source, and remember, and I'll go over here and I'll open up files in a new tab. I'll bring the drop down and then right click and say open a new tab, just so I can keep this open. And then I could go into here and say, oh, I want to bring this in. Or let's say you didn't have this and you needed to get this from me, and I gave you the file and you uploaded it and you have it here. You would change the name or something so it wasn't RMH, it was your initials. But let's say you had some problem with that. This is the actual code that will populate that. So you would need to go to your directory, not mine. You wouldn't say RM Homa. You would just have to say CSC 235, and if you named it that directory. So I'm going to bring in this code. This is the SQL code. It's not the database, but it's the code that creates the database. So if I come back here and I just put CSC, let me click here first, CSC 235, because I should be in my home directory anyway, so I don't have to put my username there. And if I go in here, CSC 235, and then I do a / and I do sb_rmh.sql. And I guess you could highlight that. Let's see if I could copy that and paste it. Yeah, I could paste it. So if you ran that with source, it should populate this database, this new one I just made. Let's see if it works. Failed to open file, error 2. Let me try it again, and let me just make sure I don't, that / wasn't necessary. I'll put a semicolon, and there it goes. Unless it was the semicolon. I'm not sure what it was. If it was the /, or maybe it's because I didn't have a semicolon. That could have been the error too. But this worked, and now if I do show tables, I'll put a semicolon. There's characters, and I'll do select all in characters because it's a capital C. So let me do that. And I'll put a semicolon. And did I spell it wrong? You have an error in your syntax. Oh, I didn't do from. Select, see, that good to read these things. Select all from. So syntax means you type the code wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean a typo. It means it's not SQL code. You should know that about syntax. But anyway, because if I spelled characters wrong, it just wouldn't find anything. Characters, semicolon, select all from characters. There we go. So there's our database. So I recreated this database into this name. The name of the database isn't as important. I made an empty database and I put this table in. So it wrote the table in. So that SQL writes that table in. And even if it had a previous database name, it'll still write this in. So if you have any problem with your database, you can do that. But I just want to show you how easy it is to kind of get this stuff in here. So it's not a matter of just like, oh, here's a database file. A database isn't a file. It's tables inside there, and it's SQL code that does that. So I'm going to do quit right now because I'll get out of this. I don't want this here. And it should say console closed. But then you can actually close it. And if you go to consoles, it should be closed, but you can X out of it. If it's here, you can just hit X and X out of it. All right, so let's start working on our database. Let's assume you have that in there already. So when you go to databases, you have this one. Now, if I wanted to get rid of this, I could just drop this. I just want to show you if I wanted to drop this, not to get on a tangent here of different things, but just so you feel comfortable in here. If you ever wanted to drop this database, you could go in here, and that actually selects it. So you could go into your regular bash console and go into the MySQL interpreter and select a database, but this selects it right away. So you can select it and delete it. So if I went in here and I wanted to delete this database, I could just do drop. Now I'm going to hit my up arrow because I might have something in here already. Show tables, and that's it. It shows you the last couple instructions that you put in there. So I'll just go back because I don't see any in here. I have to backspace, and I'm going to put drop database, and then I'm going to put the name, which is this full name here. I think I can copy it. So I want to drop that database. I'll put a semicolon just to make sure I don't get an error. So I can drop this database, and you might think, well, how does it drop it if it's inside it? It's just in the MySQL interpreter, and it has this database selected. That's all it means. I'm not inside the database. I just have this particular database selected. It's a shortcut so you don't have to select that database through your regular bash. It takes you right into the MySQL interpreter, right into that database. So you could start doing SQL code for that database. But right now I can drop it. So I'm going to drop this, and it says, okay, one row affected, and I'll quit. And I'll go back to databases, and it shouldn't be there. And there, my sample one is gone. So I have this one. This is the real one I want to use to actually show some information and to work with Python and eventually Flask. So eventually we will work on the front end. We won't just work in the console. So let's get started with that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go and do an install, because if you go back here, the first thing it tells you to do before you use this code, now you could try this code and see if it works. And maybe this is installed already, but one thing it does tell you to do is install this driver. Now, what you can do to install this driver is there's code here, and you don't have to use this M. You could just highlight this pip install my-sql-connector. So if you just highlight this, pip, which is a Python install package, I think that stands for. You don't need this M right now because that's using scripts, Python scripts. So just this pip install my-sql-connector Python. Let's just copy this right from W3 Schools and go back here. Now, where do you install it? Well, you actually have to go back to consoles and just go into your regular bash console. This will take you into your main username. This will take you into your root environment. Now, I might have this in here already. You might have it in here already. But all I'm going to do is just go here and install it here. I don't think you have to go into your Python interpreter to do this. I think you could do it here. And let's just hit enter. And it says requirement already satisfied. So I think it's already in there. But you may not have it in there. So you may have it installed. Now, I already had it in there because I think I used it before. So I have it in there, so I'm good. So I could just put quit. Now, I'm not sure if I have to put exit here. Okay, let me try exit. Because when you're in bash, I think you have to put exit. Yes. Quit when you're in the interpreter, exit when you're in the regular bash console. Regular bash console is like your terminal. The interpreters are kind of areas inside your terminal that you can get into. So anyway, I'm closing my bash console. I'm going to go back to files. So I did this, and we're going to import this into a Python file. So we have to make a Python file. And you could go down here, and we're not going to create a database because we have one. We don't have to create a table because we have one. And we don't have to insert anything because we've already inserted everything that we want in our database. We can go right down here to select. And what we're going to do is we're going to select from our table. We're going to use this code. And here it's going to import our selector, and it's going to have everything we need to connect. And that's all we're going to do here. And this will hopefully finish up this part 1 video. So I'm going to highlight all this text and copy it. And I'm going to go back here, and in this CSC 235 folder, because that's where we've been working, I'm going to go in here and make a file. I'm just going to make a Python file. And you could call it whatever. I'm just going to call it main.py for now. So I'll just, it's not a directory, it's a file. So you go here, and I'll just call it main.py. And you could call it whatever, and just make a new file. And then paste. And that's the code that we got from W3 Schools. Now, obviously, this has to change. So where do you get this stuff? Localhost, your username, your password, my database. Well, you have all that stuff. Go over here to the drop-down, hover over databases, and then right-click and open a new tab. That way, it'll keep this file open. And you could just look at your settings, and oh, there's my username, there's my host. So this host that I have right now, I could copy this. And yours will have your username in it. And that would be in the quotes for localhost. And then username is right here. I'll copy that, and I'll put that here for username. And your password, that should be my-SQL admin as long as you set that up. My-SQL admin, and keep everything lowercase. And then my database is actually going to be this whole thing here. So I can copy this. Make sure not to click on it, and put this here. And notice the way this is set up, it has commas in this connector script here, this method that's connecting, and it has these different arguments in here that are separated by commas. And that should be connecting. And what we should do here is this should select all from customers and show it. Now, this isn't going to do it in a web page right now, because remember, this is back end. No one can see this. You can't open a web page and see Python code. This is not a web page. There's no HTML here. There's nothing. So we can't view this in another tab and go, oh, look at everything. That's what we're going to work towards. But all we're going to do now is just run it, and in the console, it should show us everything from our database. Now, I didn't go over any of this stuff yet, and you can look at some of that and get it explained from W3 Schools a little bit. But basically, it's really getting your connection settings. It's setting up a cursor object, and it's executing SQL code. This is the SQL code, and it's putting in quotes, just like when you're working in another language and you have to put HTML in quotes because you're not working in HTML. Well, we're working in Python. We're not working in SQL, so it's putting SQL in quotes. So it's running this query right here, select all from customers. And guess what's going to happen? Nothing, because we don't have customers. What do we have? We have characters, and that should work now. We'd probably get some kind of error in here if we didn't have customers. And as long as this stuff's right, as long as we have our my-SQL-connector working, that we installed it, and basically we're going to get a result here where it's going to go through and basically run a loop. But see, it's doing 4x in my result. That's a loop. So it's looping through my result. It's getting all the information. It's looping through the rows, and it should print it out in separate rows, but it's going to do it in the console. So let's see what happens. And again, we did this in Programming 1. So if you had Programming 1 with me last spring, we did something like this with presidents or something like that. So let's run the file here. And actually, before we do that, what should we do? Unsaved changes. This is not Replit. You have to go over here and save it. Now, you could run it here, or you could run the file down here. And look at that. That's what we want. We're getting the information from our database. Now, you could run any kind of query from here. Select all from characters, and you could put where color. Now, we're not seeing all the columns there. We have to remember that because we're just seeing the output. But it was like where color is, because I'm in double quotes, I'm going to put single quotes, and I'll put gray. And I'll put single quotes in there. And I'll save this, and I'll run it again. And there it is. It's only showing me the records or the rows from my table where the color is gray of those database items or records. And we can do any kind of query. You could just look up SQL and do all kinds of queries from there. Now, again, we have a very simple table we're working with just to get started. But the strategy here is that we can get to the point where we could put it on a front end. This is not front end. This is Python, and we're working in a console, so no one can see this. We want to take this information and have code, and we'll probably end up using Flask, which again is another layer, so it's a little more challenging. But we're going to use Flask to put this on the front end to actually have a web page that we can look at. And can we do that in PythonAnywhere? Yes, because we actually have a section called web. And I'm not going to do that in this video, but in the next video, what we'll try to do, or unless we do more here, we'll try to connect to a front end. So that's what we'll be working towards. But for now, we should be able to connect with Python code. And if we connect with Python code, we should be able to connect with Flask code as well. So this is connecting. So all you have to do is just make sure you have this file. I could run it in ex13. You could just pretty much do that. And then maybe I'll call ex14 something else. Maybe we'll just kind of break it down instead of we keep building on this. But this is all you have to do for the first part of ex13. I think in ex14, what we'll do is continue and start working with Flask and start working with web on the front end. If I do anything else with this, I'll call it ex13 part 2. But as long as I'm your instructor and you set me up in education as your instructor, then I can look at all your code. I mean, you could certainly copy this and put it in a text file, but why? I could go here, open your file, and run it just to see that you did it. So just put an add comment that you did this and you created this main py file. You did your pip install of my-sql-connector. You copied this from W3 Schools. You have your database, and you were able to see information in here, and you know all your database information in here. So that's all you have to do for ex13 so far.